Okay, I've got another game from you from the Tata Steel tournament that's going on right now. This one between Magnus Carlsen and this gentleman from Uzbekistan. This is kind of an older picture of him. He's now, what, almost 19 years old. He's rated at 27-13 currently, so a super grandmaster from Uzbekistan. He's ranked as number 30 in the world, and then, of course, he's playing against world number one, Magnus Carlsen, in this game. But let's just go ahead and get right into the game. The world champion begins with c4. We have c5. We have knight f3, knight f6, so the symmetrical variation of the English opening here. We now have knight to c3 by Magnus, knight to c6, four knights variation, symmetrical. And now pawn to e3 here. A bit of a rarer move here. This is a bit of a rare move. Usually pawn to g3 is played here, or pawn to d4. But yeah, pawn to e3, a bit of a rare move here. We now have pawn to e5, also a bit of a rare move in the position. So at this point, we just have a few hundred master level games that have been played to this variation. We now have bishop to e2. And now pawn to d4 by the grandmaster from Uzbekistan. Magnus goes ahead and captures with c captures on d5. We have knight captures d5 by black. And now Magnus goes ahead and castles. Bishop to e7 here. And now bishop to b5 by Magnus. We have knight captures on c3 by black. And Magnus plays B captures C3. By the way, this is classical time control, so you should be able to see the clocks over there across from each person's name. But we'll go ahead and continue. We now have queen to C7 by black, and Magnus plays pawn to D4, striking at the center. We have C captures D4 by black, and C captures D4 by Magnus. And now E capture, and now knight captures d4. Bishop now to d7, and this is being called an inaccuracy. He should have gone ahead and castled and just got his king safe here, but we will continue. We have knight back to f3 by Magnus, being called an inaccuracy, saying instead he should have brought his bishop back, but we'll go ahead and continue here. We have bishop now to f6 by black, and Magnus, he could have played rook to b1 here, and that might have been best. But instead he plays bishop to a3, just hanging his rook. And the idea is, yeah, just to keep black from castling. So, yeah, Magnus sacrifices his rook just to kind of ensure that the game's going to be interesting. Nodirbek goes ahead and captures the rook. This is the best possible move in the position. And Magnus, of course, captures back on a1 with his queen. We have castles queenside now by Nodirbek. And this does seem kind of dangerous. He's got both of his royal pieces on a open file, so the rook could come over and cause some serious problems, and does. Magnus plays rook to c1 here. Nodirbek goes ahead and gets his king safe with king to b8 here, and now Magnus goes ahead and grabs the pawn on g7. And the engine considers this to be the best possible move. I'm not a big fan of such things in my positions. Yeah, this just gives the rook a chance to aim in at the king. So even though this is the best move in the position, certainly not a move that I would like to play. Though I suppose if you don't take that pawn, then you have those connected pawns over there to throw at your king's position. So yeah, it does make sense. We have rook, of course, to g8 by the super grandmaster playing black. Magnus brings his queen back to b2. It would have been better, actually, to go ahead and capture this pawn here. And we'll take a quick look at that. So instead, simply, Magnus should have just captured this pawn here. Best for black will be bishop to g4. And then we could just play bishop back to e2 for white. And this would have been a far better position than Magnus would have faced on the chessboard. But let's go ahead and go back to what actually happened on the board. So Magnus plays queen to b2 here, and we continue. We do have bishop to g4 by black. And now Magnus moves his knight back to a1. So this move is being called a mistake. Magnus spent quite a bit of time on this move. He should have instead moved his knight to d4. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that variation now. So instead, Magnus should have played knight to d4. We have knight captures on d4, pawn captures on d4, and now queen to f4 would be best for black. Bishop to c6, threatening checkmate. Pawn to b6 would be best for black, and now pawn to g3, best for white. Queen captures pawn on d4, and yeah, Magnus could trade queens if he wanted, but of course Magnus was looking for a win here. He had just lost playing the black pieces. I think he felt pretty confident he was going to win with the white pieces, and so he didn't want to play for any kind of trades of queens because that's just more likely to be a draw. Let's go back to what actually happened on the chessboard. So Magnus plays knight to e1, and we continue. We have rook now to d1 by black, and Magnus, of course, captures with rook captures on d1. We have bishop captures d1, and now Magnus plays bishop back to f1. This is being called a mistake. Magnus should have instead just pushed his pawn here, but we will go ahead and continue with what happened on the chessboard. We have knight to e5 by black, and this is being called a mistake. Instead, rook to d8 is being said to be the best way to play here, but we will just continue with what happened on the chessboard. Now we have pawn to h3 by Magnus, just being called an inaccuracy. Instead, he should have played queen to b5 here, but again, we'll just go ahead and continue with what happened on the chessboard. Nodirbek finds this interesting move here. He plays bishop to f3 here, and this is a blunder. A bit hard to know how to punish it. Obviously, you can't take with the knight, as the black's knight's going to take with check, and you've got the pin here. So, you know, what was better? Well, he should have instead played knight to c4, and we'll take a look at how that might have turned out for black. So instead, knight to c4 should have been played here by Nodirbek. Queen then to b1 would be best for white. Knight now takes bishop on a3. Queen takes bishop on d1. Rook now c8 would be best for black. And this would have been a better way to play for the super grand master of Uzbekistan. But we'll go back to what actually happened on the chessboard. So Nodirbek plays the interesting move bishop to f3, and we continue. We now have queen to d4 by Magnus. This again being called a mistake. Instead, just simply queen to b1, attacking the pawn on h7 would have been the best move, but we'll continue with what actually happened on the chessboard. We have rook now to d8 by black, and Magnus repositions his queen to h4 here. We have bishop back to d5 by black, instead saying best move would be knight to g6 here, attacking the queen and inviting the pawn to be captured. But we'll continue with what actually happened on the chessboard. We do have queen captures on h7 by Magnus, and now bishop to c4 by black. This is being called an inaccuracy. Rather, just capturing the pawn would have been the best move in this position, but again, we'll just continue with what happened on the chessboard. Magnus plays bishop to b2 here, attacking the knight. And now we have bishop captures bishop on f1, best move in the position by black. Magnus, of course, captures back. King captures f1. And now we have queen to c4 with check, forking the pawn and the king. Magnus moves his king to the only square he can, back on g1. And now we have knight back to c7, preventing any nastiness with the bishop coming here and taking it. So now this frees black up to take the pawn on a7. Magnus plays knight to f3 here, and we do have queen captures on a2. Best possible move in the position. Magnus repositions his bishop to f6 here, and now we have rook to d1 by black. Best possible move. King now to h2 by Magnus, and now pawn to a5. Magnus plays knight to d4 here, and that's being called an inaccuracy. Instead, he should have just advanced his h-pawn, got him a little closer to becoming a queen, but we'll continue with what actually happened on the chessboard. Nodirbek plays queen to d5 here. This is the best possible move. And Magnus plays the best possible move as well. He plays queen to c2, attacking the rook. We have queen now to d6 by Nodirbek. And actually, best move in this position is to sacrifice the rook. So rather than move the queen, he should have just gone ahead and sacrificed his rook for the exchange, just traded down to a winning endgame. Magnus now plays pawn to f4 here. This is the best move in the position. And Nodirbek does now capture the knight with rook captures knight on d4. Best possible move, just simplifying to a winning endgame position. Magnus, of course, captures back. You can't capture with the pawn as the bishop was hanging, so he plays bishop captures d4. And now we have knight captures d4 by Nodirbek. Pawn captures d4 by Magnus. And Nodirbek, instead of capturing the d4 pawn, captures the f4 pawn with check. And this is the best possible move. Magnus has to get out of check. He plays pawn to g3, best move he can play, but Nodirbek goes ahead and grabs the d pawn as well. And now, well, this is a very interesting position. Nodirbek has two connected passed pawns. That's very powerful, but of course, Magnus does have this passed h pawn, so let's see how this all plays out. Now Magnus does play pawn to h4, and we have pawn to a4 by Nodirbek. Magnus now plays queen to a2 here, and Nodirbek advances his f pawn to f5. This is being called an inaccuracy, so not a mistake, just a slight error. Better would have been just to move the queen to b4 here, enabling this pawn to be pushed up, and that would have been a stronger way to play in the position. Do notice that Magnus is down to just 51 seconds on his clock. Nodirbek has about 3 minutes, and they are just about to hit time controls though, so they'll get some time back on their clocks here in a moment. Magnus now plays pawn to h5, best possible move, and Nodirbek plays queen back to h8. Would have been better to actually play queen to g4 here, attacking in that fashion, but we'll continue with what happened on the chessboard. Magnus now goes ahead and grabs the a4 pawn, and Nodirbek, of course, grabs the h pawn with check. Magnus moves his king to g1. It would have been better to actually play queen to h4 here, offering the queen trade, but of course, black would not be able to accept, as that would just bring this pawn closer to being able to become a queen. So it would have been a very drawless position with queen to h4, and definitely what Magnus should have played in this position. I don't think he could have been playing for a win at this point, so I'm not sure why he didn't play that move. But we'll go ahead and continue with what actually happened on the chessboard. So Magnus plays king to g1, and we continue. We have queen now to f3, and Magnus plays king to h2. Would have been better here to play queen to e8 here and just start harassing the king. Just drive the king out of the corner there, get him into the center of the board, and white should be able to continue the game and force a draw. So yeah, he should have played queen to e8 here, and this would have been a tie game. This was a mistake in the position and allows black to get a winning advantage. We have queen now to e2 by Nodirbek. This is being called an inaccuracy. Instead, he should have played queen to f2, but the idea here is this checking move allows the protection of the b5 pawn, so it does make complete sense. It is winning. This is a winning move. Do notice they did get their time controls back. They got their 50 minutes on their clocks as they reached move 40. Magnus now plays king to g1. Instead of, he should have played king to h3, would have been better here, just getting his king up the board, maybe helping that pawn promote if things all went well. We now have queen to e5 by black. Magnus plays king to f2 here. We have pawn to b5 here. That was the whole point of that earlier move, just to pretend defending that square. And there's really not much that can be done if you're playing white here. Magnus plays queen to b4. That's as good as any move. And now Nodirbek advances his king to b7. We have pawn to g4 here. Magnus just wanting to trade off the extra pawns. Nodirbek obliges and goes ahead and captures the pawn. And of course, we have queen captures on g4 here by Magnus. King now to b6. And this is really hopeless. There's nothing that can stop black's king from marching up the board, and yeah, Magnus's king is just blocked out of the position, so this is basically hopeless already. We have queen now to g8 by Magnus, and now Nodirbek just goes ahead and advances pawn to b4, best possible move in the position. Magnus plays king to f3 here, and Nodirbek just marches up the board with his king to b5. We have king back to g2 here by Magnus, and again, this is just as good as any. And now Nodirbek plays queen to e2 with check, and Magnus plays king to g3. Now have queen to e3 with check by Nodirbek, and Magnus moves his king back to g2. We have pawn advances to b3 now by Nodirbek, and Magnus plays queen to b8 with check. Nodirbek moves his king to c4, and now we have queen to g8 with check by White. King now to c3 by Black, and now queen to c8 with check. Nodirbek moves his king to d2, and now Magnus moves his queen back to h8. We have king to c2 by Black, and Magnus moves his queen back to c8 with check. Nodirbek moves his king to d1 here, and now we have queen to h8 by Magnus. Queen now to d2 with check, and now the queen defends the pawn for its march up to the b2 square. Magnus moves his king to g3, and now Nodirbek advances his pawn to b2. And it is in this position on move 60 that the world champion does resign the game to Nodirbek. So Magnus Carlsen loses his second classical game with the white pieces in, well, I think so he'd lost back in, it's like 10 years. He'd only lost 2 classical games with the white pieces in about 10 years. He lost to Hans Niemann, who he accused of cheating, and now this gentleman beats the world champion once again. So that's the game. Thank you for joining me for that. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, as I will be doing game reviews every day, as well as some tactics. So if you're into chess, please join me. Take care. Bye-bye.